Well, good morning. I can't tell you how honored and glad I am to be invited back to share some thoughts with you this morning. I half-jokingly asked Pastor Terry about the probability of the roof falling in on an Episcopal priest speaking in a UCC pulpit for the second time. On Reformation Sunday. I think we'll find out. Now, as you all know, today marks the end of the Rooted in Love effort, the sign-up and support season here at Park Hill UCC. Given that, and with the text that I've chosen this morning, you perhaps are breathlessly awaiting a finely crafted sermon on the virtues or lack of virtue in making a financial pledge or failing to make a financial pledge. Now you can relax. We're not going there this morning, but don't relax too much. We do have a little bit of work. Now, Luke's gospel, for all else it is really good literature. It's well crafted. Luke tells us that he put a lot of work into sifting through source material regarding the life and the message of Jesus and just what God was up to in what some have called the Christ event. Now, right at the start, Luke tells his student, Theophilus, which means lover of God, that he's been doing his own research. That doesn't ring quite as nicely as it used to, does it? And after investigating everything from the very first, I too, as he put it, decided to write an orderly account for you, that you may know the truth concerning the things in which you have been instructed. Now, our passage with Jesus talking to a crowd about the inadvisability of accumulating perishable treasures is set by Luke in the midst of a travel story, coming just after Jesus has been something less than a complimentary guest at a supper soiree with Pharisees and lawyers. Take a look at chapter 11 and you'll see what I mean. Though on the road, Jesus is not yet on his final journey to Jerusalem. Even so, he seems to be warning those around him that following him, walking his way, is going to be rough. That no one will reach the end of the road without suffering serious wounds and losses. Jesus is totally honest with the disciples and warns them and the crowd that if they dare to follow, they will walk into places of peril. Do not fear those who can kill the body. And when, not if, when they bring you before the synagogues, the rulers, and the authorities, do not worry about how to defend yourself. So with that, and after some comforting words about lilies of the field, birds of the air, and the constancy of God's care, Jesus says, "Do not be afraid, little flock." Okay, don't be afraid. Take a deep breath. Don't be afraid. Got it. But then Jesus follows it up with, sell what you have. In the lunch and lectionary group, Pam Hennessy laid out what many of us have often felt, that the Bible has a certain flavor of non-negotiables about being on God's side and following Jesus. It feels like it boils down to either you're in or you're out. In just this particular way. Certainly those words about selling your possessions, giving alms, and an unfailing treasure in heaven are virtually identical to the words that Luke recounts Jesus saying to the ruler who sadly just couldn't quit his wealth. And then Jesus goes on to comment on wealth, camels, eyes of needles, and getting into the kingdom. So yeah, we get how it sounds pretty much like a line in the sand. Which side are you on? Or if you want to go Old Testament, it's a shibboleth. Just pronounce it right. Now, I said at the start that I think Luke's gospel is pretty good literature. Now, he's not Alice Walker. He has a certain economy of style with words, but neither is he Willa Cather. There's nuance in his style that communicates the nuance of Jesus' intent. And that's where we are now. What did Jesus intend in these words? I think the intent, the point, the balance point of all that Luke has discovered is that Jesus was all about the fundamental, essential nature of relationship. Luke has learned that for Jesus, relationships are the foundation and the reason for everything. Sure, Jesus is using language that communicates material images, but only to go deeper into what everything is all about. The relationship of God with the world, with humanity, and with each one of us. And what God wants for us in our relationships with the world, with each other, and certainly with God. I think Jesus is saying that if we get the relationships right, if the fundamental nature of how we exist in relationship with the world, with each other, and with God is in sync with how God is in relationship, then the world and our time in it actually makes sense. And not just in the here and now, but eternally as well. We can live without fear. We can live with a sense of pleasure, God's pleasure, in everything that God has intended for us from the start. That there is such an abundance around us, that we are free to be generous as God is generous. Get the relationships right, and you get everything else right. I think, I've long thought, that since money was invented, we've lived in a world where everyone knows the price of everything, but too few know the actual worth of anything. If you're into Aristotle, true worth, he observed, is found in the intrinsic nature of any given thing. If something is of worth, it is of worth for its own sake. And that worth is beyond price. Great minds think alike. Anything other than intrinsic worth is derivative or extrinsic worth. And extrinsic worth reduces whatever. A smile, a drop of sweat, a small child, to simply being a tool, a means to an end, a commodity to be bought and sold. But Jesus tells that little flock that includes us, that we are the apple of God's eye. that we are the treasure where God's heart is, that we are of intrinsic and ultimate worth. And us seeing each other as anything less than that is simply just getting it wrong. Clear? Oh, good, then I can stop there. But I'm a preacher, so I'm not going to. Actually, what I want to finish up with is a little story from the Talmud, which says it a lot better than anything I can say. So, long ago, in the city of Sidon, there once lived a couple who had been happily married for many years and cared for each other deeply. As the years went by and no children came, a great sadness fell upon them. By law, they had the right to a divorce, but put off such a thought. But finally, the husband said, We've waited many years, but since fate has not granted us children, I've decided that it is best for us to separate. For I truly want a child. You must go back to your father's house, as the law requires. And the wife, knowing that she could not change her husband's mind, agreed to his decision. The next day, under a cloudy morning sky, they set off to seek the permission of Rabbi Simeon Bar Yochai. At his home, Bar Yochai set out 2 chairs for them and waited to hear what they had to say. Rabbi, began the husband, my wife and I have been happily married for more than 10 years. Alas, we have no children. Now, as law permits, I have decided that she should return to her father's house. Please grant us a divorce so that we can separate with honor and dignity. Rabbi Bar Yochai looked at the couple for a long time and said, I'm sad to see you separate. But as the law permits, I give you my permission. I ask only one thing of you both. Before you take leave of one another, have a feast and rejoice. Celebrate together. For just as you rejoiced at your marriage, so you should do the same at the hour of parting. And the couple agreed and set out, sadly. On the way, the husband said, my dear wife, you have been faithful and loyal to me always. Do not go empty-handed to your father's house. When you leave, you must take a gift. Now, I've been successful in trade, and we own many fine things. Look over all that we own and choose whatever in your eyes is the most precious thing in our household. With that final word, they were home. That afternoon, the wife set the table as beautifully as if it were the Sabbath. They sat down to the feast together, and the husband ate and drank his fill. When his glass grew empty, as a dutiful wife, she refilled it to the brim, and she herself, though, tasted very little of everything. By the time the sun had set and the moon had begun to rise, her husband, drunk with wine and sated with food, fell snoring into a deep sleep. Seeing this, the wife called one of her servants who helped her put her husband into a wagon and rode with him to her father's house, and with the servants helped put him to bed. As the dawn broke, the husband woke and looked around him, and nothing looked familiar until he saw his wife standing by the bed. Where am I? What am I doing here? Don't you remember your promise to me? You told me before we parted I could take with me to my Father's house the most precious thing I could find. And that is where you are now, under his roof. I looked over all that we owned, and I could find nothing as precious as you. Well, when he heard these words, the husband smiled and wept and said, "You are so wise. You have done so wisely, and I have been a fool. Let us return home and continue as we always have done, happy and content with one another." And so they did for many years, living and working under the sunny skies of Sidon. And it is said that when Rabbi Simeon Bar Yochai heard the news, he said a blessing for them. Do not be afraid, little flock, for where your treasure is, there will your heart be also.